The soft glow of the desk lamp illuminates the dusty attic as Emma carefully opens another cardboard box. The gentle patter of rain against the windows creates a soothing rhythm, contrasting with the unsettling silence of the old Victorian house she and her husband James had purchased just 3 weeks prior. Outside, the branches of an ancient oak tree scrape against the siding, a sound that had initially unnerved Emma but now seemed almost comforting in its predictability. "James," Emma calls out, her voice echoing through the cavernous space. "I think I found something interesting." The floorboards creak as James appears at the top of the attic stairs, wiping his hands on a rag. He's been busy restoring the ornate woodwork throughout their new home, a passion project that had consumed most of his weekends since they moved in. His dark hair is dusted with fine particles of sanded wood, and a smudge of varnish marks his left cheek. "What is it?" he asks, making his way toward her through the maze of forgotten treasures left behind by previous owners. Boxes of Christmas ornaments, outdated electronics, and furniture covered in sheets create an obstacle course in the dimly lit space. Emma holds up a leather-bound album, its cover cracked with age and adorned with faded gilt patterns that might once have been elegant. Dust motes dance in the light as she blows gently across the surface, revealing intricate embossing that suggests craftsmanship from another era. "It looks like a family photo album. Quite old, too," she says, her historian's interest piqued. Emma had studied art history in college before becoming a high school teacher, and antique photography had been a particular fascination. James settles beside her on the wooden floor, their shoulders touching as Emma gently opens the album. The spine creaks in protest, and the unmistakable scent of old paper and leather fills the air between them. The first page reveals a handwritten inscription in faded sepia ink. "Family memories. Blackwood family. 1899-1907. "Blackwood," James murmurs, his breath warm against Emma's ear. "I think that was the family that built this house. Mr. Howard mentioned something about them when we were closing on the property." Emma nods, turning the fragile pages with delicate fingers. Each photograph is carefully mounted, with dates and occasional notes written beneath in elegant script that speaks of a formal education rare for women of that era. The images capture the usual moments of a family's life at the turn of the century. Formal portraits with subjects standing rigidly in their finest clothes, holiday gatherings around decorated parlors, outdoor picnics with blankets spread beneath towering elm trees. "Look at these clothes," Emma says with a smile, pointing to a photograph of women in high-necked blouses with impossibly tiny waists. The women in those corsets and high-necked blouses. Can you imagine wearing all those layers in summer? "They must have been roasting in July," James chuckles, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm grateful for modern conveniences. Central air conditioning alone makes us luckier than the wealthiest people of that time." They continue turning pages, studying the faces of long-deceased individuals whose lives once filled the very rooms they now called home. The photographs are remarkably well preserved, a testament to the craftsmanship of early photography and the care with which they'd been stored. Emma stops suddenly, her finger hovering over a particular photograph. Unlike the others, this one lacks a caption or date. It shows a baptism scene, a somber-looking couple standing beside a priest who holds an infant over an ornate baptismal font. The church interior is visible in the background, with Gothic arches and stained glass windows casting colored light across the stone floor. The mother's face is partially hidden by an elegant hat with a small veil, but what is visible suggests exhaustion or perhaps distress rather than maternal pride. "This must be in St. Michael's Church downtown," James remarks, leaning closer to examine the architectural details. "The architecture is unmistakable. It hasn't changed much in over a century. We drove past it on the way to that Italian restaurant last weekend." Emma doesn't respond. Her eyes are fixed on the photograph, her brow furrowed in concentration. A strand of her auburn hair falls across her face, but she makes no move to brush it away, too engrossed in whatever detail has captured her attention. "Emma, what's wrong?" James asks, sensing the sudden tension in her posture. "The baby," she whispers, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Look at the baby's reflection in the baptismal water." James leans closer, squinting at the small detail Emma has noticed. The baptismal font in the photograph contains water, its surface reflecting the participants of the ceremony. But while the reflections of the adults appear normal, slightly distorted by the water's surface, but recognizable, the baby's reflection is different. "I don't see anything unusual," James says after a moment, his practical engineer's mind resistant to suggestion. Emma reaches for a magnifying glass from a nearby shelf, left behind by the previous owners, along with other odds and ends, and holds it over the photograph. Look again. The reflection doesn't match the baby. James peers through the magnifying glass, adjusting it to focus properly on the small detail. As the image clarifies, his blood runs cold. The infant in the priest's arms appears peaceful, eyes closed as if sleeping, tiny features relaxed in innocent slumber. But in the reflection on the water's surface, the baby's eyes are wide open, staring directly at the camera with an intensity that seems impossible for a newborn. More disturbing still, the reflection's mouth appears to be stretched in an unnatural smile. Not the reflexive, gas-induced grins of actual infants, but something knowing and deliberate. That's odd, James says, struggling to find a rational explanation as goosebumps rise on his arms. Must be a quirk of the photography process. Remember, exposure times were much longer back then. The baby probably moved during the shot. Emma isn't convinced. Then why is only the reflection affected? The actual baby looks perfectly normal. And look at the adult's reflections. They match exactly. Just the baby is different. She turns the page, hoping to find more information, but the next several pages are blank, the mounting corners empty as if photographs had been removed. Flipping further, they discover more photographs dated 1903, showing the same house they now inhabited, but with different furnishings. The couple from the baptism photograph appears in several images, but there is no sign of a baby or child. Let's take this downstairs where we can look at it properly, Emma suggests, carefully closing the album. The light is better in the dining room. As they descend the attic stairs, neither notices the subtle shift in the house's atmosphere, how the shadows seem to deepen in corners that should be illuminated by their passage, how the air grows slightly colder despite the summer heat outside, how the reflective surface of a small decorative mirror in the hallway seems to retain their images for a fraction of a second too long. In the dining room, Emma spreads the album open under the bright chandelier light. The baptism photograph seems even more unsettling in this improved illumination. Details previously obscured in the attic's dimness become apparent. The tightness around the mother's eyes suggesting recent tears, the father's white-knuckled grip on a walking stick, the priest's expression of not just solemnity, but something bordering on fear. There's something written on the back, James notices, carefully removing the photograph from its mounting corners. The paper is thicker than modern photographs, with a slightly textured surface that speaks of hand-coding processes long abandoned by commercial photography. On the reverse, in the same elegant handwriting as the rest of the album, is a single line: Elizabeth Blackwood, christening, April 17, 1901. Elizabeth Blackwood, Emma repeats, the name hanging in the air between them. I wonder what happened to her. James has already retrieved his laptop from his home office, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he boots it up. Let's find out. The local historical society has a pretty comprehensive online archive. I used it when researching the property before we bought it. As the computer boots up, Emma continues examining the photograph. Now that it's removed from the album, she notices other details. How the parent's expression seems strained rather than solemn. How the priest's grip on the baby appears unnecessarily tight. How the shadows in the church background seem to form vague, watching figures. The baby's christening gown is elaborate, with intricate lacework that must have taken months to create by hand. Yet there's something almost perfunctory about how it's arranged, as if the garment were more important than the comfort of the child within it. Here we go, James says, his fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. The blue light from the screen illuminates his face, casting strange shadows that momentarily make him look older, wearier. Local Historical Society has digitized a lot of records from that era. Blackwood. Here. The Blackwood family was quite prominent in this town. Thomas Blackwood was a successful banker, married to Eleanor Montgomery in 1898. They had one daughter, Elizabeth, born January 3, 1901. That fits with the baptism date. Emma nods, mental calculations coming easily to her math teacher mind. April 17th would make her about 3.5 months old. James continues reading, his expression growing troubled as he scrolls through the digitized records. The steady rhythm of the rain provides a melancholy soundtrack to their discoveries. Oh, that's strange. According to this, Elizabeth Blackwood died on April 18, 1901, the day after her baptism. Emma feels a chill run through her, goosebumps rising on her arms despite the warm summer evening. Cause of death? It doesn't say specifically. Infant mortality was high back then. Could have been anything. disease, accident. James trails off, continuing to scroll through the digital archives. The death certificate just lists natural causes, which was pretty common for that era. Medical knowledge was limited compared to today. Does it mention what happened to the parents? Emma asks, a sense of foreboding building in her chest. James scrolls through more information, his expression growing increasingly grim. Thomas Blackwood committed suicide in 1903, hung himself in the attic of their home. He pauses, looking up at Emma with wide eyes. This home. Emma feels the weight of this revelation settling over them, the house suddenly feeling different around them, older, watchful. And Eleanor? What about the mother? James clicks through several more pages, the soft sound of rain against the windows intensifying as if responding to their growing unease. She was committed to Westbrook Asylum in 1904, diagnosed with acute melancholia and delusional episodes. She died there in 1907. The rain outside intensifies, drumming against the windows with sudden urgency. The chandelier light flickers briefly, casting momentary shadows across the walls that seem to move independently of any physical objects in the room. It's just a sad story, James says, trying to sound rational, though his voice has taken on a slight tremor. Losing a child drove them both to madness. It happened all too often in those days, before modern medicine and psychological understanding. Emma's eyes are drawn back to the photograph. The baby's reflection seems to be looking directly at her now, that unnatural smile widening impossibly across features that should be incapable of such an expression. She quickly turns the photograph face down on the table, her heart pounding in her chest. "I think we should put this back where we found it," she says quietly, wrapping her arms around herself as if suddenly cold. James closes his laptop with a decisive click, the room dimming slightly as the screen's blue light disappears. "If it makes you uncomfortable, we can. But it's just a photograph, Emma. An optical illusion from primitive photography techniques. Silver nitrate plates could produce all kinds of strange effects, especially with reflective surfaces." As if responding to his dismissal, the lights flicker again, longer this time. When they stabilize, the photograph has somehow turned face up again on the table, though neither of them touched it. The baby's reflection seems to have shifted position slightly, its unnatural gaze now fixed on James rather than Emma. Emma gasps, jerking back from the table. "Did you see that?" James stares at the photograph, his rational mind struggling to find an explanation. It must have been a draft. The air conditioning just kicked on, but they both know the central air is not running. The house is silent except for the rain and the occasional creak of old timbers settling. Emma stands abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I'm going to make some tea. Do you want some?" James nods, grateful for the distraction. "That sounds good. I'll put the photograph away." As Emma disappears into the kitchen, he continues studying the photograph. The more he looks at it, the more details emerge. The way the priest's collar seems to be hiding what might be scratch marks on his neck, how the mother's eyes contain not grief but terror, how the father's hand, partially visible at the edge of the frame, appears to be gripping a small object that glints metallically in the church light. The sound of breaking glass from the kitchen interrupts his thoughts. "Emma," James calls, rising from his chair, his heart suddenly racing. "Are you okay?" There's no response, only an eerie silence where the domestic sounds of tea-making should be. James hurries to the kitchen to find Emma standing motionless, surrounded by the shattered remains of a teacup. Her face is deathly pale, her eyes wide and fixed on the window above the sink. "Emma, what happened? Did you cut yourself?" James asks, carefully stepping around the broken porcelain to reach his wife. She points a trembling finger toward the window. "I saw a reflection, a baby's face. It was smiling at me." James looks at the window, but sees only darkness and the occasional streak of rain, the glass reflecting the kitchen's interior rather than revealing anything outside. "You're letting that photograph get to you. It's just your imagination working overtime." Emma shakes her head vehemently, her auburn hair swinging with the motion. "No, James, I saw it. And it wasn't just any baby. It looked exactly like the reflection in the baptismal font." James guides her away from the broken glass, feeling her trembling beneath his touch. "Let's clean this up, and then we should get some rest. It's been a long day, and we're both tired. Things always seem more ominous late at night." As they prepare for bed, the atmosphere in the house continues to change subtly. The creaking of floorboards becomes more pronounced, as if someone were pacing in empty rooms. The shadows in hallways seem to linger after they've passed, recoiling slowly like reluctant curtains. The rain, which had been steady all evening, stops with unnatural suddenness, leaving a silence that feels oppressive. In bed, Emma lies awake, staring at the ceiling where shadows form patterns that seem almost deliberate in their movements. James has fallen asleep beside her, his breathing deep and rhythmic. She can't stop thinking about the photograph, about baby Elizabeth who died the day after her baptism, about her parents' tragic ends in the very house where they now lay. A soft sound breaks the silence, the gentle coo of an infant. Emma freezes, straining to hear. It comes again, slightly louder this time, emanating from somewhere down the hallway. The sound is unmistakable, the happy gurgle of a baby too young to form words, but old enough to express contentment. "James?" she whispers, shaking her husband's shoulder. "James, wake up!" He stirs groggily, his consciousness rising slowly from deep sleep. "What is it?" "Listen." They both hold their breath, waiting. The sound comes once more, unmistakably the gurgling laugh of a baby. James sits up, now fully awake, his expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. "That's not possible. There's no baby in this house." "It's coming from down the hall," Emma says, her voice barely audible. "From the room we were planning to use as a nursery." James reaches for the baseball bat he keeps under the bed, a precaution in their new neighborhood, and moves toward the bedroom door. Emma follows close behind, clutching his arm, her fingernails digging into his skin though neither notices. The hallway is dark except for the faint moonlight filtering through a window at the far end. The sound has stopped, but a new sensation has taken its place, the distinct feeling of being watched by many eyes, all hidden in the shadows that seem deeper than they should be. Maybe it was just the house settling, James suggests, though his grip on the bat suggests he doesn't believe it. Old houses make all kinds of noises, especially after rain when the wood expands and contracts. They check each room methodically, the guest bedroom with its half-unpacked boxes, the office with James's drafting table covered in architectural plans, the bathroom with the antique clawfoot tub they'd been so excited to restore. Everything is undisturbed, exactly as they left it before retiring. As they approach the final door, a small room they designated as a future nursery once they started a family, the temperature drops noticeably. Their breath becomes visible in the suddenly frigid air, small clouds that hover before dissipating into the darkness. "Do you feel that?" Emma whispers, her voice trembling. James nods, reaching for the doorknob with a reluctant hand. The brass feels impossibly cold against his skin, almost burning with its intensity. The door swings open to reveal an empty room bathed in moonlight. The walls are bare, the floor vacant except for a few paint cans and drop cloths from their renovation efforts. They'd planned to paint that weekend, to transform the space from its current state of neglect into something bright and hopeful. As they step inside, their breath becomes even more visible in the suddenly frigid air. The door slams shut behind them with a force that makes both of them jump, the sound reverberating through the empty house with unnatural volume. "James!" Emma cries, spinning around. He tries the handle, but it won't budge. It's stuck, or locked somehow. Emma's eyes dart around the room, searching for an explanation. How is that possible? There's no lock on this door. A soft glow begins to emanate from the center of the room, coalescing into a small, shimmering puddle of light on the floor. As they watch in horror and fascination, the light expands, taking the form of a baptismal font, the exact one from the photograph. "This isn't real," James mutters, rubbing his eyes with his free hand, the bat still clutched tightly in the other. "We're having some kind of shared hallucination triggered by suggestion from that photograph and amplified by the late hour. The font solidifies, looking as real and substantial as any physical object. Water appears within it, rippling gently though there is no breeze, and in that water, a reflection becomes visible. The face of an infant with wide, unblinking eyes and a mouth stretched in that same unnatural smile from the photograph. But there is no baby to cast such a reflection. Emma backs against the wall, her heart pounding so loudly she's certain it must be audible. "James, we need to get out of here." He nods, turning back to the door and throwing his weight against it. It remains firmly shut. He tries again, harder this time, grunting with the effort, the muscles in his shoulders straining against his t-shirt. Behind them, a new sound emerges from the spectral font, the gentle splashing of water. They turn slowly to see wet footprints forming on the floor, small and pudgy, like those of a crawling infant. The invisible presence moves toward them, leaving a trail of dampness across the wooden floorboards that gleam silver in the moonlight. Emma screams as something cold and wet brushes against her ankle. James swings the bat reflexively, but it passes through empty air, meeting no resistance. The footprints continue past them to the wall, where they suddenly transform, elongating and widening into adult-sized prints. The temperature drops further, their breath now forming thick clouds in the freezing air. "What's happening?" Emma sobs, pressing herself against the door, her fingers scrabbling uselessly at the unyielding wood. The answer comes in a form neither expected. The walls around them begin to change, the bare plaster transforming into the stone walls of a church. The moonlight from the window shifts, taking on the colored hues of stained glass. Within moments, they find themselves standing not in their future nursery, but in what appears to be the interior of St. Michael's Church, exactly as it appeared in the photograph from 1901. The baptismal font remains in the center, but now it's surrounded by three figures, the same ones from the photograph. The priest, stern-faced and rigid, his clerical collar tight around a throat that indeed shows faint scratches partially hidden by the white fabric. The mother, Eleanor Blackwood, her eyes downcast and filled with dread, her gloved hands clutching a handkerchief so tightly her knuckles must be white beneath the fabric. The father, Thomas Blackwood, his posture suggesting barely contained rage, his right hand indeed concealing something in his pocket that creates a telltale bulge. And in the priest's arms, a baby, Elizabeth Blackwood, her eyes closed peacefully, unaware of the tension surrounding her. "We're seeing what happened," James whispers, his scientific mind struggling to process the impossible scene before them. Somehow we're witnessing the actual baptism. The figures don't acknowledge James and Emma's presence. They proceed with the ceremony as if alone in the church. The priest speaks in Latin, his voice echoing strangely as if coming from a great distance or through water. "Ego te baptizo in nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." As he lowers the infant toward the water, Emma notices something she couldn't see in the photograph. A subtle resistance in the baby's body, a tension that seems to suggest the child is aware of some danger. The water touches the baby's forehead, and several impossible things happen simultaneously. The infant's eyes snap open, revealing not the blue or brown eyes of a human baby, but entirely black orbs that reflect no light. The priest falters, nearly dropping the child into the font. The mother begins to weep silently, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. The father reaches into his coat pocket. His fingers closing around what Emma now sees is a small silver revolver, ornately engraved with initials that catch the colored light from the stained glass windows. "Stop," the father says, his voice distorted as if underwater. "This is not my daughter." The priest recovers his composure, continuing the ritual with trembling hands. "The child must be baptized, Mr. Blackwood, for her soul's salvation." "That thing has no soul," the father responds, his voice rising, echoing off the stone walls of the church. "Eleanor, tell him what you saw that night." The mother's weeping intensifies, but she says nothing, her eyes fixed on the floor as if afraid to look at the child. "She came to the nursery and found it hovering above the crib," the father continues, addressing the priest directly now, its feet never touching the ground. "When she screamed, it assumed the form of our Elizabeth again. But we know the truth. Our real daughter is gone, replaced by this abomination." The priest's face betrays no surprise, only grim determination. "All the more reason to proceed, Mr. Blackwood. The sacrament may cleanse whatever darkness has taken hold." He resumes the baptism, lowering the infant further into the water. The child's skin begins to steam where it contacts the blessed water, though no one but Emma and James seems to notice this detail. "We tried to tell you," the mother finally speaks, her voice hollow with despair. "The night after Elizabeth was born, we heard something in the nursery. Thomas went to check and found the window open, the curtains billowing though there was no wind, and beside the crib, a shadow that was not cast by anything in the room." The priest pauses, uncertainty crossing his features for the first time. "The next morning," she continues, her voice gathering strength as the words pour out, "Elizabeth would not feed. She did not cry. She only watched us, with eyes that knew too much for an innocent child." The father raises the revolver now, pointing it not at the priest but at the infant in his hands. "I won't allow this creature to wear my daughter's face any longer." "Mr. Blackwood," the priest shouts, his voice thundering through the church, "This is God's house. Lower your weapon." But Thomas Blackwood's finger is already tightening on the trigger. In that moment, the baby turns its head, an impossible motion for an infant so young, and locks eyes with its father. The unnatural smile spreads across its face, revealing tiny teeth that no 3-month-old should possess. What happens next is a blur of motion and sound. The father fires the revolver. The priest twists away, shielding the child with his body. The bullet strikes the edge of the baptismal font, chipping the stone and ricocheting into the shadows. In the chaos, the baby slips from the priest's grasp and falls into the font with a splash. The water hisses and bubbles as if boiling, though no heat is evident. The priest reaches in to retrieve the infant, but recoils with a cry of pain, his hands emerging red and blistered as if burned by acid. The mother rushes forward, plunging her own hands into the water without hesitation. She lifts the baby out, cradling it against her chest. The infant appears unharmed, its eyes once again closed peacefully, its skin dry despite having been submerged. "It's over," the mother whispers, rocking the baby gently. "The baptism is complete." The father lowers the revolver, his expression shifting from rage to confusion. "Eleanor?" She looks up at him with a smile that mirrors the unnatural expression they had seen in the baby's reflection. "Everything is fine now, Thomas. Our Elizabeth is perfect." Emma gasps as she notices something James cannot see from his angle. Eleanor Blackwood's eyes, previously a warm brown in the photographs they had examined, now reflect the same obsidian darkness they had glimpsed in the infant's gaze. The scene dissolves around them, the church walls melting back into the plaster of their nursery. The spectral baptismal font vanishes, leaving only a damp circle on the wooden floor. The door behind them clicks and swings open slightly. Emma and James stand in stunned silence, trying to process what they've witnessed. "It wasn't the baby that was replaced," Emma finally says, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was the mother. During the baptism, something transferred." James shakes his head, desperate to cling to rationality despite everything they've just experienced. "This isn't possible. We experienced some kind of shared hallucination, triggered by suggestion from that photograph and amplified by our exhaustion." "Then how do you explain this?" Emma points to the wet circle on the floor where the font had appeared, the small pudgy footprint still visible leading to the wall. Before James can respond, a sound echoes from downstairs, the gentle closing of a door. They exchange glances and move cautiously into the hallway, which is now illuminated by lights they don't remember turning on. As they descend the stairs, they find the photo album open on the dining room table, though they'd left it closed. The baptism photograph lies beside it, but something has changed. In the image, the baby's reflection now appears normal, matching its physical appearance perfectly. Instead, it's the mother's reflection that shows the disturbing smile, her eyes in the water's reflection wide and black and knowing. "We need to get rid of that photograph," Emma says firmly. "Burn it." James doesn't argue this time. He retrieves a metal trash can from the kitchen and places it in the sink. Emma drops the photograph inside, and James lights a match, holding it above the can. Just before he drops it, a woman's voice echoes from everywhere and nowhere. It won't help. They freeze, looking around frantically for the source. "The photograph isn't the vessel," the voice continues, sounding like it's coming from inside their own heads. "I am everywhere in this house, in its walls, in its foundations, in the very air you breathe." The match burns down to James's fingers. He drops it with a curse, lighting another immediately. "Why are you doing this?" Emma demands of the unseen presence. "What do you want?" A cold laugh ripples through the room, seeming to come from the reflective surfaces, the windows, the chrome coffee maker, the polished granite countertops. What every mother wants, a child. The realization hits Emma with horrifying clarity. You've been waiting for someone to move in, someone who would use that nursery. "Smart girl," the voice purrs, a sound like ice cracking beneath pressure. "I've waited so long. This house has stood empty for years, but now you're here, and you'll give me what I need." James drops the second match into the trash can. The photograph curls and blackens as flames consume it, filling the kitchen with the acrid smell of burning chemicals and paper. But the voice only laughs louder, the sound rippling through the house like water disturbed by a thrown stone. "I told you. The photograph is meaningless now. It served its purpose, to show you what happened, to prepare you." A sudden pain doubles Emma over, causing her to cry out and clutch her abdomen. James rushes to her side, supporting her as she struggles to remain standing. "What are you doing to her?" he shouts at the empty air, his face contorted with fear and rage. "Nothing she wasn't planning already," the voice responds with cruel amusement. "Just accelerating the process." Emma looks up at him with terror in her eyes. "James, I'm pregnant. I was going to tell you this weekend." His face pales as the implications sink in. "We're leaving. Now." He helps Emma toward the front door, but as they approach, every light in the house extinguishes simultaneously, plunging them into absolute darkness. The temperature plummets, their breath clouding before them despite the summer night outside. "You cannot leave," the voice states calmly. "This house has claimed you as it claimed the Blackwoods before you, as it will claim your child." James fumbles for his phone, activating the flashlight function. The beam cuts through the darkness, illuminating their path to the door. He reaches for the handle, but it's ice cold to the touch and refuses to turn. "The windows," he says, guiding Emma toward the living room. But each window they try is either frozen shut or reveals only a solid black void beyond the glass, as if the outside world has ceased to exist. Emma's pain intensifies, causing her to stumble against a side table. The photo album that had been left in the dining room is somehow there, open once again to a page they hadn't seen before. James shines his light on it, revealing a newspaper clipping dated April 19, 1901. "Tragedy strikes local family, infant dies. During baptism, mother suffers breakdown." The brief article describes how baby Elizabeth Blackwood had apparently drowned during her christening when the priest suffered a sudden seizure and dropped her into the baptismal font. Though quickly retrieved by her mother, the infant could not be revived. The article noted that Mrs. Blackwood had to be sedated after insisting that her baby was still alive and merely sleeping. "That's not what we saw," Emma gasps through her pain. "The baby didn't drown. History is written by the survivors," the voice explains, a hint of pride in its tone. "And I made sure the only survivor told the story I wanted told." James helps Emma to the couch, his mind racing for a solution. "If you're Eleanor Blackwood, you died in 1907, in an asylum." A bitter laugh fills the room, seeming to emanate from the antique mirror hanging above the fireplace. The glass ripples like disturbed water, though nothing moves in the physical world. "Eleanor Blackwood died in this house on April 17, 1901, the moment her body pulled that thing from the baptismal water. What emerged from the font was no longer her child, and what returned home was no longer Eleanor." The asylum doctors never understood why Eleanor kept insisting she needed to return home, why she clawed at the walls trying to escape. They never knew she had left something vital behind, something bound to this house, waiting. Emma doubles over again, her face contorted in agony. "James, something's wrong. This isn't normal. It's too early. It's too soon." He kneels beside her, feeling utterly helpless. "What do you want?" he shouts into the darkness. "Tell me what you want." "I want what was taken from me," the voice hisses, suddenly sounding less human, the words distorted as if spoken underwater. "A life, a body, a child. The thing that took my daughter's form eventually abandoned it when the body died, but it left the door open, a door between worlds. For over a century, I've existed in the space between, gathering strength, waiting for the right vessel." The pain subsides momentarily, allowing Emma to catch her breath. "She wants our baby," she whispers to James. "She's trying to take our baby." James stands, his expression hardening with determination. "You can't have our child. Whatever you are, ghost, demon, delusion, you have no power over us except what we give you." The voice laughs again, but there's an edge of uncertainty to it now. "You know nothing of my power." "I know you're bound to this house," James counters, his voice stronger now. "I know you've been trapped here for over 100 years. I know you need us more than we need you." He helps Emma to her feet, supporting her weight as they move deliberately toward the front door. "You cannot leave," the voice insists, but it sounds less confident now, a note of desperation creeping in. "Watch us," James responds, reaching for the door handle again. This time, instead of finding it frozen, the handle turns easily under his grip. The door swings open to reveal their front porch, the street beyond illuminated by street lamps, the night air warm and humid after the rain. As they step across the threshold, a wail of rage echoes through the house behind them. The door slams shut with such force that it cracks down the middle. They don't stop until they reach their car, James helping Emma into the passenger seat before running around to the driver's side. As he starts the engine, They both look back at the house. Every window is illuminated now, though they had left all lights off. In the attic window, a figure stands watching. A woman in early 1900s dress, her face contorted with fury. "Don't look," James says, putting the car in reverse. "Don't acknowledge it." As they pull away from the curb, Emma clutches her abdomen, but the pain has subsided. "James, I think it's stopped." He reaches for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "We're not going back there. Ever. Where will we go?" "Hotel tonight, new house tomorrow. I don't care if we take a loss on this one." As they drive through the quiet streets, putting distance between themselves and the house, neither speaks of what they experienced. The rational parts of their minds are already beginning to question the reality of it, to suggest explanations involving carbon monoxide leaks or shared psychosis triggered by the power of suggestion from the photograph. But they know. Something ancient and patient waits in that house on Maple Street, something that will continue to wait for the next family, the next expectant mother, the next opportunity to claim what it believes it's owed. 3 months later, Emma sits in a rocking chair in their new apartment, reading a book on childbirth. Their experience in the Blackwood house has faded somewhat, taking on the quality of a shared nightmare. They've told no one about it, not even when explaining their sudden move to friends and family. The small one-bedroom apartment is nothing like the spacious Victorian they'd abandoned, but its very ordinariness feels like a shield against the unexplainable. No creaking floorboards, no shadowy corners, no history stretching back over a century, just clean, modern lines and the comforting hum of neighbors going about their lives on the other side of thin walls. James enters with a cup of tea, placing it on the side table before kneeling beside her to feel the gentle swell of her growing belly. "Any movement today?" he asks, his face softer now, the haunted look that had lingered for weeks finally fading from his eyes. Emma smiles, placing her hand over his. "Not yet. Doctor says it could be another few weeks before we feel anything." James kisses her forehead, lingering a moment longer than usual. "I love you both so much." As he leaves the room to continue unpacking boxes, they're still settling in after 3 months, both subconsciously reluctant to make this new place too permanent. Emma returns to her book. A slight fluttering sensation in her abdomen causes her to pause and place a hand over the spot. Too early for kicking, probably just digestive movement. She returns to reading, missing the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, how the shadows deepen in corners, how the air grows slightly colder despite the autumn warmth outside. In the reflection of the window beside her, unseen by Emma, her hand resting on her belly shows an unnatural smile. Across town, a sold sign appears in front of the house on Maple Street. A young couple stands on the front lawn, the woman visibly pregnant, both smiling with excitement about their new beginning. Inside, in the empty attic, the leather photo album lies open to the final page. A new photograph has somehow appeared there. Emma and James standing in front of their house on the day they took possession, their faces beaming with hope and possibility, and in the window behind them, barely visible, a woman's face watches with patient, hungry eyes. The circle continues, as it has for over a century. The house waits. The presence within it waits. Time is meaningless when you have eternity to claim what's yours. Shadow Frames presents 1901 baptism photo looks beautiful until you examine the baby's reflection. They say a photograph captures more than just an image. It preserves a moment in time, freezing emotions, relationships, and sometimes secrets. In the early days of photography, when exposure times were long and equipment cumbersome, these captured moments held a particular weight. Families would dress in their finest clothes, arrange themselves in formal poses, and remain perfectly still as the camera performed its mysterious alchemy, transforming light and shadow into permanent records of their existence. It was April 17, 1901, when the Blackwood family entered St. Michael's Church for their daughter Elizabeth's baptism. Thomas Blackwood, a respected banker, stood rigid in his formal attire, his wife Eleanor beside him in a high-necked lace gown, her eyes downcast beneath a modest hat. In the arms of Father William Morris, 3-month-old Elizabeth lay swaddled in a christening gown that had been in the Montgomery family for generations. The baptism was a modest affair despite the Blackwoods' standing in the community. Only the godparents and a handful of close family friends attended. And, somewhat unusually for the time, a photographer, Mr. Howard Danvers, who had documented the Blackwood wedding 3 years prior and had been specifically requested for this occasion. "I want everything preserved," Thomas had insisted when arranging the ceremony. Every detail, every moment. His tone had been so forceful that Father Morris had hesitated before agreeing to allow photography in the sacred space. If those present found this emphasis strange, none remarked upon it. Thomas Blackwood was known to be particular, his banking precision extending to his personal affairs. Besides, photography at significant life events was becoming more common among those who could afford it, despite the cumbersome equipment and elaborate setup required. What was strange, however, was the tension evident in both parents throughout the ceremony. Eleanor Blackwood clutched her handkerchief so tightly, her knuckles whitened. Thomas repeatedly checked his pocket watch, his eyes darting to the church's heavy wooden doors as if expecting an unwelcome arrival. The godparents exchanged concerned glances but said nothing, attributing the parents' behavior to natural anxiety over their first child's important religious milestone. Father Morris proceeded with the ritual as he had countless times before, his voice steady as he recited the Latin phrases that would welcome the infant into the faith. The church was silent except for his resonant voice, the occasional cough from an attendee, and the distant sound of birds outside the stained glass windows. When he reached the crucial moment, lowering the child toward the ornate stone baptismal font, Danvers prepared his camera, wanting to capture this essential moment. The photographer raised his hand, signaling for absolute stillness from all present. The flash powder ignited with a brief, brilliant flare that momentarily transformed the dim church interior into a tableau of harsh light and sharp-edged shadows. The participants blinked against the sudden light, but maintained their positions as trained. The photograph was taken, a perfect record of a solemn religious milestone. Perfect, that is, until it was developed. Howard Danvers prided himself on his meticulous work. In his small dark room behind his studio on Main Street, he carefully processed each glass plate negative, ensuring the chemicals were precisely measured, the timing exact. The familiar scent of fixative and developing solutions filled the confined space as he worked by the dim red light, his hands moving with practiced precision. When he hung the Blackwood baptism photograph to dry and examined it in the dim red light, he initially saw nothing amiss. The composition was excellent, with the Gothic architecture providing a powerful frame for the human subjects. The lighting had been challenging in the church interior, but he had compensated well, capturing detail in both the brightest and darkest areas of the scene. The composition was excellent. The Gothic arches of St. Michael's soared overhead, the stained glass windows providing a kaleidoscope backdrop. Father Morris stood dignified in his vestments, the Blackwoods appropriately solemn beside him. Baby Elizabeth appeared peaceful in the priest's arms, positioned above the baptismal font with its still water reflecting the scene. It was only when Danvers was preparing the final print for mounting that he noticed the anomaly. Looking closer at the reflection in the baptismal water, he saw something impossible. While the reflections of the adults appeared as expected, inverted but otherwise normal, the baby's reflection was drastically different from its physical form. In reality, Elizabeth's eyes were closed, her expression serene. But in the reflection, her eyes were wide open, staring directly at the camera with an intensity that seemed impossible for a newborn. More disturbing still, the reflection's mouth was stretched in what could only be described as a knowing smile, an expression no 3-month-old could possibly form. Danvers' first thought was that he had made some error in the development process. Perhaps some chemical had been contaminated, or light had leaked into his dark room. He examined the negative carefully, but found no technical explanation for the discrepancy. The glass plate showed the same disturbing anomaly. This was not an artifact of the printing process. His second thought was that it must be a trick of the light, a random pattern in the water that merely suggested these disturbing features when captured in the two-dimensional medium of photography. Perhaps ripples on the water's surface had created an optical illusion that only became apparent when frozen in a photograph. Yet no matter how he tried to rationalize it, the image remained profoundly unsettling. The baby's reflection seemed to be looking not just at the camera, but somehow through it, directly at whoever might eventually view the photograph. There was an awareness in that watery gaze that felt impossible, not just for an infant, but for any human subject. Howard Danvers was not a superstitious man. 20 years of working with the scientific processes of photography had given him a rational mind. But as he stared at that reflection, he felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the April evening chill. He considered discarding the print and telling the Blackwoods there had been a technical failure. He could offer to photograph the child in his studio instead, in a controlled environment where such anomalies wouldn't occur, but professional pride and curiosity prevented him from doing so. Besides, Thomas Blackwood had been insistent about documenting the baptism specifically. He would not be satisfied with a studio portrait as a replacement for the ceremonial image. So Howard mounted the photograph, placed it in an envelope, and prepared to deliver it to the Blackwood residence the following day, pushing his unease aside as imagination. He never got the chance. The news spread through the small town before dawn. Baby Elizabeth Blackwood had died during the night, just hours after her baptism. The cause was listed as natural causes, that frustratingly vague term that covered everything from undiagnosed illness to the mysterious ailments that so often claimed infants in that era before modern medicine could identify and treat the myriad threats to newborn life. But whispers suggested otherwise. The Blackwoods housekeeper, Mrs. Penelope Collins, had arrived early that morning to find Eleanor Blackwood in a state of hysteria, clutching her dead child and insisting that it's not her, it's not my Elizabeth. According to Mrs. Collins, the nursery was in disarray, furniture overturned, the window open despite the cool night air. Most disturbing of all, the silver baptismal cross that had been a gift from the godparents was found broken in half beside the crib. Thomas Blackwood had been discovered in his study, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him, his revolver loaded but unfired on his desk. When questioned by the town doctor, he had been incoherent, mumbling about black eyes and the thing in the water. When the doctor arrived to examine the infant, he found no obvious cause of death. The child showed no signs of illness, no marks or injuries. She appeared, in his words, as if merely sleeping, with the most peaceful expression. This contradicted Mrs. Collins's claim that the baby's face had been twisted and wrong when she first arrived, but grief and shock could explain such discrepancies in observation. Howard Danvers kept the photograph to himself. In the wake of such tragedy, it seemed cruel to present the parents with this final image of their daughter, especially with that disturbing reflection. He locked it away in his files, intending to destroy it once some time had passed. But Howard Danvers was also a historian of sorts. His photographs chronicled the town's development, its people, its significant events. Destroying any record, no matter how disturbing, felt like erasing history. So the photograph remained in his files, forgotten as more pressing matters occupied his attention. The tragedy of the Blackwood family, however, was just beginning. In the weeks following Elizabeth's death, Eleanor Blackwood withdrew from society completely. She refused visitors, spoke only in whispers to her husband, and was often found in the nursery, rocking an empty cradle while humming lullabies. Physicians diagnosed melancholia, the expected grief of a mother who had lost her child. The townspeople, initially sympathetic, began to avoid the Blackwood house. Delivery boys reported hearing strange sounds from within, sometimes a baby crying, though there was no infant there, sometimes a woman's laughter that seemed to come from empty rooms. The gardener quit after claiming he saw Eleanor standing at the nursery window, holding what appeared to be a baby, though when he mentioned it to Thomas, the banker insisted his wife had been with him in the study at that very moment. But Thomas Blackwood confided in his closest friend, James Wilson, that something far more troubling was occurring. According to Wilson's later account, Thomas claimed that Eleanor had begun insisting that Elizabeth was still alive, that the baby they had buried was something else, something that just looked like our Elizabeth. More disturbing were Eleanor's night terrors. Thomas reported being awakened by his wife's screams, finding her pressed against the wall, pointing at empty corners of their bedroom, and crying out about shadows that moved independently of any light source, about whispers in a language she couldn't understand but somehow knew was asking for permission. Permission for what? Wilson had asked. To come back, Thomas had responded, his voice hollow. To come back through Elizabeth. Thomas confessed that he had begun to fear his wife, not for any threat she posed to him, but because sometimes, particularly in the moments between sleep and waking, he would look at her and see someone, or something, else looking back through her eyes. It's still Eleanor's face, he told Wilson, but the expression is all wrong, like someone wearing an ill-fitting mask. By autumn of 1901, Eleanor's condition had deteriorated to the point where Thomas reluctantly agreed to consult specialists in Boston. For 2 months, Eleanor underwent various treatments, from rest cures to early forms of talking therapy. She returned home in December, seemingly improved, though Thomas noted in his journals, discovered years later, that something essential remains missing in her eyes. The Blackwoods attempted to resume their lives. Thomas returned to his position at the bank. Eleanor took up charitable work, focusing particularly on organizations that assisted orphan children. To outside observers, they appeared to be healing, moving forward from their tragic loss with the resilience expected of their social standing. Then came the incident at the Harrington children's birthday party in May 1902. Eleanor had volunteered to help with the celebrations for the Harrington twins, who were turning 5. She had been in charge of games, performing her duties admirably, until the moment Mrs. Harrington brought out her new Kodak camera to take photographs of the children. As the flash powder ignited, Eleanor began screaming. According to multiple witnesses, she lunged for the camera, shouting incoherently about not letting it capture them and "it's in the reflections." When restrained, she became catatonic, staring blankly ahead and repeating, "She's watching through the glass. She's always watching." Thomas Blackwood arrived quickly to collect his wife, apologizing profusely for the disruption. Eleanor was confined to their home afterward, a nurse hired to attend to her around the clock. The incident became the primary topic of gossip throughout the town, with some suggesting that the Blackwoods had been cursed for some unspecified transgression, others proposing more sympathetic explanations involving the fragility of the female mind in the face of maternal loss. It was during this period that Thomas began his own descent into obsession. His journals detail increasing preoccupation with his daughter's death and his wife's condition. He collected books on spiritualism, folklore, and ancient religions. He corresponded with professors of theology and anthropology, asking questions about infant baptism across different cultures and beliefs about souls becoming trapped between worlds. Most significantly, he began photographing his home obsessively, every room, every angle, with particular attention to mirrors, windows, and other reflective surfaces. On each photograph, he wrote meticulous notes about any anomalies he perceived, no matter how slight: a shadow that seemed too dark, a reflection that appeared delayed by milliseconds, a blur where no movement had occurred. Thomas Blackwood's behavior at the bank became erratic. He would stare at the polished brass fixtures, at the glass partitions separating tellers from customers, at the reflective surface of ink pots. Colleagues reported him muttering to himself, asking questions of empty air, startling violently when catching sight of his own reflection. In March 1903, Thomas Blackwood requested a leave of absence from the bank. It was granted immediately. His colleagues had noticed his deteriorating condition, his disheveled appearance, his tendency to stare at reflective surfaces and mutter to himself. The last entry in Thomas Blackwood's journal, dated April 16, 1903, reads simply, "I saw her today. Not Eleanor, Elizabeth. She was standing behind my reflection in the mirror. She smiled at me with teeth no infant should have. Tomorrow is the anniversary. Tomorrow it will try again. I must end this." On April 17, 1903, exactly 2 years after Elizabeth's baptism, Thomas Blackwood hung himself in the attic of his home. His body was discovered by the nurse who had come to check on Eleanor after receiving no response at the front door. Eleanor Blackwood was found in the nursery, which had been maintained exactly as it was on the day of Elizabeth's death. She sat in the rocking chair, holding a bundle wrapped in a christening gown. The bundle contained no baby, only wadded linens. On the wall behind the crib, written in what was later confirmed to be Thomas's blood, were the words, "She is in the glass." Eleanor was committed to Westbrook Asylum the following week. The attending physicians diagnosed her with acute melancholia with delusional features. The case notes describe her as alternating between catatonia and periods of intense agitation, during which she would attack any reflective surface, windows, mirrors, even polished metal, attempting to break through to the other side. The most consistent element of her delusion, according to Dr. Frederick Harper's reports, was her insistence that her daughter had been taken during the baptism and replaced with something wearing Elizabeth's skin. This entity had died intentionally, Eleanor claimed, to open the door between worlds. Now, she believed, the real Elizabeth was trapped in reflections, trying to return, while something else was using those same reflections to watch and wait for another opportunity to cross over. The staff at Westbrook Asylum noted other peculiarities in Eleanor's case. She refused to look at her own reflection, covering mirrors or turning them to face the wall. She would only drink from opaque cups, never glass or anything that might show her reflection. Most disturbing to the staff was her habit of speaking to the water in her bath, having conversations with what she called the other Eleanor, who she claimed was trapped beneath the surface. Eleanor Blackwood died in Westbrook Asylum on November 12, 1907. The official cause was listed as pneumonia, though rumors persisted that she had somehow managed to drown herself in a basin of water, her face pressed into her own reflection until life departed. The Blackwood house stood empty for nearly a decade afterward. Various families attempted to live there, but none stayed longer than a few months. Complaints ranged from practical issues, persistent cold spots, problems with plumbing, to more disturbing claims about strange sounds in the night, particularly what several tenants described as an infant crying from inside the walls. In 1917, the house was purchased by the Thornton family, who undertook extensive renovations, including removing the attic where Thomas Blackwood had ended his life. The Thorntons reported no unusual experiences and lived there peacefully until 1946, when the property was sold following Mr. Thornton's death. The house changed hands several more times over the decades, its dark history gradually fading from local memory. The story might have been forgotten entirely, if not for the discovery made during renovations in 1987, when workers removing a section of wall in what had once been the nursery found a small space behind the plaster, containing a leather-bound album. The album contained photographs of the Blackwood family, everyday moments of their brief life together. And there, in the middle pages, was the baptism photograph that Howard Danvers had withheld, the image of baby Elizabeth being held over the font, her reflection showing that impossible, knowing smile. The construction worker who found it, Michael Reeves, reportedly took the album home to show his wife. 3 days later, their 2-year-old son drowned in the bathtub during a moment when Mrs. Reeves stepped away to answer the phone. Investigators noted one unusual detail. The child was found facing downward, as if looking at his own reflection in the water, with what the responding officer described as a peaceful smile on his lifeless face. The album changed hands several times after that, each owner experiencing some form of tragedy, particularly those with young children. Eventually, it found its way to the Town Historical Society, where it was cataloged and stored away, its significance unrecognized among thousands of other artifacts from the town's past. And there it remained until 3 weeks ago, when Emma and James Mitchell purchased the original Blackwood house, unaware of its history or the forces that still lingered within its walls. Their story begins on a rainy evening, as Emma explores the attic of their new home, and discovers a cardboard box containing what appears to be a replica of the original Blackwood album, identical in every detail, though the Historical Society's records clearly show the original remains in their archives to this day. As Emma and James examine the baptism photograph under the bright chandelier light, neither notices how the shadows in their dining room deepen, how the reflections in their windows seem to watch with patient, hungry eyes. Neither realizes that by bringing the photograph into the light, by examining its details, by wondering about the fate of baby Elizabeth Blackwood, they have opened a door that was never fully closed, a door through which something has been waiting to return for over a century. Emma feels a strange fluttering in her stomach, too early for the baby she hasn't yet told James about. She dismisses it as nerves, unaware that in the reflection of the window beside her, her hand resting on her belly shows an unnatural smile. The circle continues, as it has for over a century. The house waits. The presence within it waits. For a baptism is not just a welcoming into faith. It is also an acknowledgement of what waits beyond the veil of our world. And sometimes, if the water reflects something other than what it should, it might just let that something through. The story of the Blackwood baptism photograph isn't just a tale of supernatural horror. It's a reminder of the thin membrane that separates our world from what might lie beyond, and how easily that membrane can be pierced by grief, by obsession, by the desperate love of a mother for her child. What moves beneath the surface of the baptismal water now watches from every reflective surface in the Mitchell home. The glass of picture frames, the chrome of kitchen appliances, the mirrors in bathrooms and hallways, all become eyes for an entity that has waited patiently for new vessels, new opportunities, new lives to claim as its own. In 1901, a baptism photo captured more than a sacred moment. It captured a doorway, and doors, once opened, are not easily closed again. Howard Danvers never took another baptism photograph after that day. He claimed his equipment was unsuitable for church interiors, but those who knew him well noted his new habit of covering mirrors in his studio, of avoiding puddles after rain, of drinking only from ceramic cups rather than glass. When he died in 1932, his collection of photographs was donated to the Town Historical Society. The archivist who cataloged them reported finding dozens of images of the Blackwood baptism, duplicate prints made from the same negative, each with the reflections in the baptismal font meticulously scratched out with a pin or blade. As you examine this story, you might want to consider your own reflection. Is it truly mimicking your every move? Or is it watching, waiting, smiling when you are not? Perhaps it's best not to look too closely. Some reflections are better left unexamined. For the entity that claimed Elizabeth Blackwood, that drove her parents to madness and death, that has passed from one vessel to another across more than a century, is always seeking new ways to cross over, always looking for a new reflection to inhabit, always searching for what was taken from it so long ago. A life, a body, a child. The baptism photo may look beautiful at first glance, but some images are doorways, and something is always waiting on the other side, watching through the glass, wearing a smile that no infant should possess. Look away while you still can, before it notices you noticing it, before it sees you through the screen, before it recognizes that you too could be a suitable vessel. The next time you catch your reflection moving a fraction of a second too late, remember the Blackwood baptism photo. Remember what lies beneath the surface of still water. Remember that some reflections are not reflections at all, but windows. Windows through which something is always watching, always waiting, always smiling. Shadow Frames presents 1901 Baptism Photo. Looks beautiful until you examine the baby's reflection.